Please face the flag of our nation and recognize the principles for which it stands. Department 1 is now in session. The Honorable Mark E. Wyndham, Judge, presiding.
Please be seated, everyone. Good morning. Welcome back to Department 1, People versus Robert Durst. Mr. Durst is present. His lawyers are present, coming out. We have Mr. Milius, Mr. Bailey at council table, Mr. Lewin, Mr. Miata, Mr. Henderson, seated here, Mr. Chesnoff and Mr. DeGuerin, both present. All right. The people's case is resuming. I understand there's a video. Ladies and gentlemen, the video has been edited. That's obvious, and that's pursuant to my own rulings about relevancy of various areas of questioning. So it may jump a little bit, but this video is the video testimony of a witness that you should consider the same as if the witness were testifying here live for you. So with that, are you ready to proceed?
We are, but we actually would like to proceed with a live witness first.
The live witness first. Always, I like to have people who actually are here.
Well, they're all,
given
not
priority.
that the videos of people aren't alive, but I mean a person in court. They're not all dead.
That's reassuring.
Thanks for that clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Okay, then you may call the next witness.
Thank you. And the video editing pursuant to your rulings would apply to all the videos.
Yes, that's true for all of them. I think at the next one it's a little rougher. Is that it?
Yeah, I think so.
Jumps a little bit.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. The people called John Ross. He's alive.
Yeah.
Your Honor, this just in, keeping the court apprised, witness is still living.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay. You may bring in the witness.
Stand in the witness stand. Raise your right hand and be sworn. Do solemnly state that the testimony you may give in the cause now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you, sir. Please be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name.
Okay, we need that screen on, I guess. Okay, that's so they can see the witness. Got it.
Can you please state and spell your first and last name?
First name is John, John. Last name is Ross, Ross.
Thank you.
You may proceed, Mr. Bailey.
Thank you. And Your Honor, with the court's permission, I have a lot of different documents with this witness. May I remain at the council table?
Yes.
Thank you.
But keep your voice up so you can be heard.
I will.
Behind you. Yes.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
What is your occupation?
I'm a supervisory special agent with the U.S. Department of Justice.
Okay, and if you could please try to keep your voice up. It's a large courtroom.
Sure.
That microphone you can pull up as far forward as you can, and you can speak into it. I think they'll be able to hear you. So, where do you work?
At the United States Department of Justice.
What do you do there?
I supervise special agents, investigators that are assigned to the U.S. Attorney's Office and participate in the investigations that are being conducted out of that office.
When did you start working at the Department of Justice?
In March of 2003.
Okay. What in particular is your specialty within that agency?
Well, now I supervise the investigators and the investigations.
Okay. Well, let's take a step back. Do you have any background training and experience in examining and interpreting telephone records?
Yes, prior to being an employee of the U.S. Department of Justice for 20 years, I was a New York City Police Department detective assigned to a unit that conducted the technical aspects of major investigations being conducted by the New York City Police Department.
Let's take a step even further back. What was your occupation before you entered law enforcement?
Before joining the NYPD in January of 1983, I worked for a contractor of New York Telephone, installing large telephone systems in commercial establishments in Manhattan.
And can you explain to the jury what New York Telephone was back in the 1980s?
Back prior to January, I believe in 1984, the local provider of landline telephone service in the New York City metropolitan area was a company called New York Telephone Company.
And did they provide all telephone services for the entire New York City area?
Yes, the New York City metropolitan area.
Would that
So
include?
extended outside of the New York City proper.
So would it include the 5 boroughs of New York?
Yes, the 5 boroughs and the many adjoining counties.
Was Westchester County serviced by New York Telephone?
It was.
Okay. And what was the mother company of New York Telephone?
It was AT&T
Okay.
at the time.
For how many years did you work as at New York Telephone?
It was a subcontractor of New York Telephone, but approximately 4 years.
What in particular did you do?
Did the installation of large telephone systems for commercial companies in Manhattan.
And as part of that occupation, did you get to learn actually how the actual mechanics of the New York Telephone Company equipment worked?
Yes,
Did you get to learn the switching equipment and how that worked?
yes,
Did you get to learn about the billing systems and how signals made their way into billing and were recorded?
yes,
And you said you did that for approximately 4 years?
yes.
So where did you go after working for New York Telephone?
Well, after I started at the NYPD, I started as a uniformed police officer, and then made my way into investigative tract, basically investigative unit. Initially, investigating robberies and crimes out of one of the precincts in New York City.
Your Honor, can we get a year?
Yeah, what year did you go in to the New York Police Department?
January of 1983.
Okay. And for how many years were you with the New York Police Department?
20 years, a little over 20 years.
All right. Did you ever, in your career at the New York Police Department, progress to an area that dealt specifically with more technical aspects of investigations, including the analyzing of telephone records?
Yes, in approximately, say, 1987, I was assigned to a unit that's handled the technical aspects of all the major investigations.
Did you, were you involved in investigations involving wiretaps,
Yes,
pen registers,
yes,
cell phone tracking systems,
yes,
the analyzation of telephone landline records?
yes.
For how many years were you in that assignment?
The entire career in the NYPD.
Did you receive specialized training from the New York Telephone Company in the operation of their system?
Yes, New York Telephone and all the other operating companies as they came online.
Were you involved in tracing telephone calls?
Yes,
Were you involved in determining where calls were made from,
yes,
where they were made to?
yes,
Were you trained by the vendors that made all the equipment as
Yes.
well for New York Telephone Company?
yes,
So do you have an intimate knowledge, or I shouldn't use the word intimate, do you have a knowledge of how the equipment that the New York Telephone Company operated in 1982,
yes,
in 81, in the 80s?
yes,
Were you trained and are you familiar with, in the 1980s, how the New York Telephone Company created and maintained their records?
yes,
Have you provided training to others in all these areas?
yes,
And do you continue to do so?
I do.
Where so?
For training, I'm a certified New York State police instructor. I train at the New York City Police Department Homicide Investigators course, Criminal Investigators course, Special Victims course. I train at the U.S. Department of Justice Training Center. I've trained internationally, Pakistan, Thailand.
And does all this training cover the areas of how telephone systems and equipment work and how to analyze and interpret telephone records?
Yes.
So in 2003, then you went to the Department of Justice?
Yes.
Why is that?
I had the opportunity to retire from the NYPD and the opportunity to work for the Department of Justice as a second career.
And in at some point, did you join the Joint Terrorist Task Force?
Yes.
What year is that?
Well, I was initially assigned to the Joint Terrorist Task Force after the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, but as a member of the NYPD. And then subsequent to retiring and my assignment with the U.S. Department of Justice, my assignment was to focus on terrorism and national security investigations, so I was then assigned to the JTTF under the Department of Justice.
And what primarily did you work on?
Terrorism cases,
Okay.
international terrorism cases.
Did you work on the case that stemmed from the events of 9/11?
I did.
In what role?
Analyzing, obtaining phone records that were associated with the act on 9/11.
Okay. I'm going to ask you some questions about some phone records from the 1980s. In the 1980s, it was New York Telephone that operated all of the telephone systems in the New York area, as you testified, correct?
Yes.
Were there any other telephone companies handling local calls in the 1980s?
Not handling local calls. There were some startup long-distance carriers that were coming into operation.
Okay. But if we're talking about local and toll calls, but not long-distance calls, was it New York Telephone?
New York Telephone, yes.
Do you know what New York Telephone Security is?
Yes.
What is that?
It's the unit within New York Telephone that liaisons with law enforcement when law enforcement requests records, subpoena billing records, wiretaps, anything that had to do with law enforcement and the phone system.
Okay. So, can you just describe briefly for the jury back in the 1980s when a telephone call was made, how the call made it from the person making the call all the way onto the person's bill eventually?
So the telephone service in a particular area is handled by something called the central office. It'll be the same out here. The telephone, I think, was maybe Pac Bell out here. You'll see buildings spread around areas. So that building, within that building would be the telephone equipment or the brains of the telephone system. From that building, back then, there was physical wires that reached out to an individual's residence or business that connected the physical telephone to that building. That telephone equipment is called a central office switch. That's what provides the dial tone when you pick up the phone. And then after you pick up the phone and you dial the number you want to reach, depending on what numbers you put in, it routes that call. So if you wanted to call somebody local within your own central office, someone, say, lives down the block or a next door neighbor, you would dial the 7 digits at the time, and then the equipment would route that call through the wires, through your wires, to the central office, and then ultimately to that person's phone. If it was your neighbor, then the neighbor's phone would ring. The minute that call was picked up by the person receiving the call, that would start the billing cycle. That would, the clock would start on the bill for that call. And if the call was to a different area, other than that central office, other than that local area, if you dialed another area code, say, in front of those 7 digits, that system, that local system, would know how to route that call to the next central office that provides service to the person receiving the call. So it just expands out. And then if you dialed an international call, it would send the call to the long-distance carrier, who would then place the call, overseas.
Okay. And if somebody made a call and the call was in their local calling area, the building in that local call area would handle all of the charges and the billing and recording of that call. Is that right?
The recording of the billing, not of the actual call, yes.
Okay. However, if it was a toll call and outside of your local calling area, that building would refer the signal to another building in the receiving party's calling area. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then it would get recorded that way in terms of the minutes, the bill, etc.
Right. The billing system would know by the digits that you dialed of where that call needed to go, and then subsequently, when they process that data, they would know, what to charge you. Would you be charged for a local call, or would you be charged for a long-distance call? And it would calculate the actual amount depending on, what your plan was with the phone company. What was included with your package.
Okay. I have a pack of a stapled set of papers, telephone records for line 7635022. It is 7 pages. May I mark this as People's next in order?
69.
People 69, Your Honor?
69.
And there's been a stipulation to the authenticity of all phone records in this case previously, Your Honor.
Thank you.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to show you what's been marked as People's 69. Can you see that?
I can, through the fog of my glasses. Yeah.
I have the actual original records. If those are hard to read,
No, it's fine now. Somebody,
got 'em?
Yeah, somebody
Okay.
blew it up.
if there's something that you can't read and you want to look at the actual originals from the 80s, I have them here, okay?
Yes.
So if you look at the first page, and then you look at the second page, if you can flip to the second page.
How do I flip?
Yeah, it's coming.
Oh, okay.
Okay. You see how they're different type of documents? They just look different?
Yes.
Do you recognize the difference in that?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury why that first page looks different than the second page and all the remaining pages? Can I just hand him the record so he has it?
Yeah.
This is a composite.
This is Yeah. Okay, so why does that first page look different? Is it a different type of record?
Yes, so back in the early 1980s, the retrieval of billing records was not as instantaneous as it is now with computers. It was a labor-intensive process for the phone company security unit to pull particular records depending on the date that the calls were made and then the date that the billing cycle ended. So these are two types of records. They're all billing records, but the first page is something called the local usage detail. It basically just shows from their local usage detail system. Even though it's called local usage detail, you'll see that there are numbers on there from a different area code than the originating number, which was still considered New York Telephone. So that's why they're still within the region of New York Telephone. The second page is from the actual bill that a customer would receive at the end of their billing cycle.
In the third page and through the rest of the pages?
Yes, all those are part of the actual bill. It's an image of the bill that the customer would have received in the mail.
So, back in the 1980s in investigations that you've been involved in, when records were sought by law enforcement or someone else pursuant to subpoena, would it be typical that you would get these local usage detail records, like the first page, as well as billing records?
Yes, especially if the request by law enforcement is made before the billing system can actually generate the bill the customer would get. So if we needed somebody's phone records before their bill was ready to be produced, we would subpoena New York Telephone. They would provide what they had available from the actual billing system, and then if the records were not, if the calls were so new that they didn't make it to that billing system, they would go into the local usage detail system, which is what you see on the first page.
Okay. All right, so, and then if you look through the second, if you look at the second page, or if you look at the second page, it says page 2 of 8 on the top. You see that?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
if you go to the next page, it says page 4 of 8.
Yes.
And the next page is 5 of 8,
Yes.
then 6 of 8, then 7 of 8, then 8 of 8.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
So you notice there's pages missing.
Yes.
Is that out of the ordinary, or do you have, in your experience, an explanation as to why records that were sent pursuant to subpoena would be missing pages?
Yeah, so this was back in 81, early 80s, before the computer age where you could just put in a date range. So now we would be able to put in, or the phone company would be able to put in a date range and print out a reply, a response to law enforcement that includes all the calls within that date range. Back then, it was all done by people, so they would actually have to print the bill, and then if there were calls on that bill that would not have been covered by the subpoena, so the subpoena would say I needed calls from, December 1st, 2005 to December 30th, 2005, they would have to actually print the bill, look at it. If there were calls on that bill that were outside the response of that subpoena that wasn't covered by the subpoena, they would either remove a page. We've got, I don't know if it's not in this, but you would see blacked out portions, and some people in the security unit would, I guess it was their preference not to use a marker to black it out. They would actually cut it. So you might even get a page that has, the middle of it is cut out. That was because the records that were on that originally was not within the scope of the subpoena.
Okay. So, looking at these records, can you tell the jury who the registered owner was or user of this telephone line?
It was Robert Durst.
Okay. And what was, yeah. Well, how can you tell that? I know the name appears there, but what does that name represent?
That's the user of the phone and the bill. The bill went to Robert Durst.
Okay. And what telephone number were these records for?
They were for, it would be 914-763-5022. And the reason you would know it was 914 is you see there's at the very top left-hand corner, you see what would be a WR. The W stands for Westchester. The 4 would be the last digit of the area code. So that was a 914 area code in Westchester. And then you have the rest of the phone number. The 763 is what identifies the central office, or the local office to the address, to the address of service, not necessarily the address of the bill. And then the last 4 digits, 5022, was the actual 4 digits that identify the phone in, the phone number itself.
Okay. So this landline, I'm sorry, this is a landline?
Yes,
Okay. And this landline was located in Westchester County, is that right?
yes.
Okay. If we go to the next page, please. And if you could just explain to the jury, so that they can properly interpret these records later, what some of these fields mean. So let's look at, you see, well, before we do that, these are the billing records, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay. Are the billing records for the time period response to the subpoena fully inclusive and accurate of all the calls that were made from this telephone line? In other words, you have the LUDs and then you have the billing records. Would the billing records be a full and complete set of all the calls?
yes.
All right, so let's look at the billing records. The first column, it says NO. What does that column represent?
That's just a call number on the bill. That's all the,
Okay, and if you look at each page, it starts over at 1 and goes to 15. So is that just a sequential numbering of the calls per page?
yes,
Does it have any significance really?
no,
Okay. So then the next column says calling date.
yes.
What does that column represent?
That's the month and the day, so it'd be January 31st, and then you would have to look up at the very top center where it says BDT, bill date, so then you would see that it's 1982, so that would be January 31st of 1982.
So all of these records for this phone line on people's, is it 69?
Yes.
Are for 1982?
Yes, on this page, I would have to look at the others just to make sure that there's nothing.
If you could just double check and make sure we're looking at all 1982 numbers.
That means the bill was sent in 82.
I'm sorry?
I'm trying to figure out, the 131 would not be 1982. Generated in 82.
You understand the question?
Well, are you asking me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes,
You
sir.
can- Well, is it okay if you ask the question?
You may take him on a brief voir dire.
Thank you. So the first number under number 1 is January 31st, but that call would have been January 31st, 1981, correct?
No,
Okay, and so it's 82?
yes,
Okay,
because, yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Got it.
Thank you.
Okay, resume your
Thank you.
direct examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, are these all from 1982, these calls?
This page, yes. Let me just, yes,
Okay. So, under that column says calling date, that's the date the call was placed in
Yes.
1982, correct?
yes,
All right. The next field says time.
yes.
What does that represent?
That's the time that the call was connected.
All right. So in other words, that time, is it the time that the person dials the number, or is it the time that the person on the other end picks up the phone?
It's the time that the person picks up the phone, or something picked up the phone, an answering machine, but the call was started.
Okay.
Yes.
The call was started. That's the time. And is that in New York time?
Yes.
If someone dialed the number but no one picked it up on the other end, or no machine picked it up on the other end, would that call show up on the record?
No.
It wouldn't. Okay. All right, and then place, the column that says place, what does that represent?
That's the location where the receiving party telephone was, the geographical area.
All right, so for instance, on January 31st at 2:12 p.m., somebody received a call and picked it up. The call was made to Newtown, Connecticut.
Yes.
All right, the next line looks self-explanatory. That's the state that city's in, right?
Yes.
And the next line where it says, the next column where it says number, what does that column represent?
That's the complete telephone number, the area code, the exchange, and the last 4 digits of the phone number.
That was dialed.
Yes.
The next column?
Is the minutes charged for the call.
Okay. If the call is not picked up, or the call wouldn't show, correct?
Correct.
If the call is picked up and it's less than a minute, what number would show there?
If the call was picked up, they round up, right? So if a call was picked up and it was 34 seconds, you would see 1 minute.
Okay. Then you have a column that says charge.
Yep, yes.
Is that important for analyzing records from a law enforcement point of view?
Not really, it's the amount the person was charged for that call.
Okay. And then the next column says RTS. What does that represent?
The rest of the columns, the RTS, the ID, and the M column are all associated with how the telephone company rates the call to bill. It's just internal, how they figure out how much they charged for the call.
Okay. So I want you to assume that this telephone number is for a number in South Salem, Westchester County, okay?
Yes.
If someone called this South Salem number on a particular day, based solely on these records, would we have any way of knowing that that call came into this line?
No.
Okay, so in other words, these records only show outgoing calls.
Correct.
Is there a way to figure out incoming calls today for calls made in 1982?
No.
Okay. That would have had to been figured out in 1982, right?
Yes.
And how quickly in 1982?
Within 18 months to maybe 3 years, but probably I would say 18 months would be the safest bet.
Okay. Are all outgoing calls reflected in these records?
No.
No. Okay. So, can you explain what you mean by that?
So if a call was made locally within the subscriber's local calling area, depending on their plan, if it was a local call that was under 3 minutes or possibly 5 minutes, depending on the plan and the equipment that the phone company had in place, you would not see the call.
Okay. So, and is that based on is that a billing thing? In other words, because the person wouldn't be charged for the call,
Yes.
it wouldn't show up on the record?
Right.
All right. Yeah, so if somebody on this phone picks it up, dials a number, and the number they dialed is within that person's local primary calling area, that number wouldn't show up necessarily on this bill, right?
Depending on the length of the call.
Okay. If it was over 3 or 5 minutes, it would show up, is that right?
It would show up, but you would not see the phone number that they called. You would see that there was a call.
Okay. And what's this distinction between 3 and 5? Can you explain why you're saying it's either 3 or 5 minutes?
Because at the time, the New York Telephone was upgrading their equipment to newer versions of equipment, and depending on where they were in the process, some of that equipment, that central office equipment, would register a call only after 5 minutes, and then others after 3.
Okay. Well, let's assume the equipment in place, either one, 3 or 5 minutes. Let's just assume 5 minutes, okay? So let's assume it's the equipment in place at that time is the 5-minute equipment, okay?
Yes.
If somebody picks up the phone, dials someone in their local calling area.
Your Honor, I'm going to object without establishing a foundation that this is one of the phone numbers that falls within the 3 to 5 as opposed to the hypothetical. I think some foundation should be laid that this one applies, especially since we see calls that were charged that have 1 minute on them. So,
Your Honor, there's previously been a stipulation regarding the phone numbers in this case.
I can clarify, actually, Your Honor.
Sure.
Yeah.
Clarify.
Thank you. Can you tell from looking at these records whether the equipment in place was the 3-minute versus the 5-minute?
I can't, but what I can tell is the numbers that you see on this page that's displayed are not calls that fall within what would be the free local calling area. So it's not 3 or 5, it's 1. 1 is the threshold.
So let's just take a step back before we talk about the 3 versus 5-minute issue. The numbers that will show up on here are, number 1, calls within your local calling area that are over this 3 or 5-minute threshold, correct?
Correct.
Other numbers that will show up will be toll calls outside of the local calling area.
Yes, they're regional calls, but they're billed as toll calls and toll calls.
Okay, so for instance, you're in Westchester County and you're calling Long Island, or you're calling Newtown, Connecticut. Those are outside of your local calling area, right?
Yes,
Those are considered toll calls.
yes,
Those toll calls always show up on these records,
Yes.
no matter what, right?
yes.
Okay. So the only calls that might not show up are calls within your same calling area that are under either 3 minutes or 5 minutes, depending on the equipment in place.
Correct.
Back in the early 1980s, what percentage, if you know, of the equipment was upgraded to the 5-minute equipment versus a 3-minute equipment?
I don't know.
You don't know.
Yeah.
So just to make sure I understand correctly, any call made from this telephone that is outside of the local calling area will show up on these records. Is that right?
That connected.
That connected
Yes,
means someone or something picked it up.
yes,
Any call made from these records, from this telephone, within the same primary calling area, will be shown only if it's longer than 3 minutes or 5 minutes, depending on the type of equipment that was in place at the time.
yes.
But you can't tell that,
No,
correct?
correct.
Okay. If you called 911 from this number, would the 911 calls show up on these records?
No,
Okay, why not?
it's not a billed call. These are billing records. 911 is a free call.
Okay. If you did call 911, even though it didn't show up, you had the capability of calling 911, right?
Yes,
And where would those calls get routed to? Which law enforcement agency? Assume in Westchester County here, if you pick up the phone and call 911, where would those calls get routed to?
whatever the local police department that handled the residence where, or the business where this line was installed, it would automatically be routed to that police department.
Okay. So if somebody wanted to call from South Salem and Westchester County to the 20th Precinct, New York Police Department in Manhattan, they would actually have to make a decision to dial that number for the 20th Precinct.
Yes,
Okay. And on the numbers, the minute column, if there's at least a 1 there, it means someone or something picked up the call. Is that right?
yes,
If a call was made from this number in Westchester County to a phone line on Riverside Drive in Manhattan, would that call show up? And it was connected.
yes. If it was answered, it would show up.
So if someone picks up this phone line in Westchester County, calls the phone number in Riverside Drive in Manhattan, and someone or something picks up that call, that call would show up on these records.
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, I have another set of records. It's 4 pages. May I mark this as People 70?
Yeah.
Water? Yeah.
You're all right? Forrest,
Thank you.
So, may I mark?
Yes.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked as People 70. Again, for all phone records, we previously had a stipulation as to authenticity and foundation. Do these phone records, these 4 pages, if you look at them, also appear to be LUDs and toll records from the New York Telephone Company?
Yes.
All right. And the first 2 pages look different than the last 2 pages, is that right?
Yes.
Is that because the first 2 pages are the billing records and the second 2 pages are the LUDs, local usage? What does LUD stand for?
Local usage detail.
Local usage detail. Okay, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So looking then at the billing records, who was the user, registered user or owner of this telephone line?
K. Durst.
And what address was this getting billed to?
12 East 86th Street, apartment 1520 in New York City.
And what was the telephone number for these particular records?
The 212-734-0898.
If you go to the next page, so this is a phone line at 12 East, well, it's being billed to 12 East 86th Street, correct?
Yes.
Okay. This telephone number, 734-0898, do these records show calls made from the time period of January 29th and February 5th?
And January 7th.
And January 7th, okay. Is there a reason they're out of order there?
Yes, any specialized call would generally get billed later, possibly on the next billing cycle, because it just hasn't processed. And that number 3, that call on January 7th, was a call from Queens that was billed to this number. A call from Queens to the San Francisco number, billed to the 212-734-0898. So that was a specialized call, almost like a collect call type thing. Those records get generated later.
Okay. And the fields on these records, are they the same descriptions of the fields on the other records that you've already described?
Yes.
So on January 29th at approximately 8:34 p.m., somebody picked up the phone from this telephone line, dialed someone who lived in Newtown, Connecticut. The number is 203-426-6994, and spoke to, and that call connected for 8 minutes.
Just approximately 8 minutes, yeah.
And there's no other calls made from that line, toll calls at least, until February 5th at 2:53 p.m.
Yes.
Okay. I have another set of records, Your Honor. So, this is 7 pages, this packet, may I mark this as People 71?
Yeah.
So I just, for the record, let me just describe this in a little more detail. It's a little out of the ordinary. The first page is a plastic sleeve, and it contains like original, looks like lead records, and the plastic sleeve has records on both sides of it.
What kind of records?
The local usage detail.
Oh, LUD.
LUD.
Local usage detail.
Yes.
Got it.
So those two are in the plastic sleeve. And the rest of the records, the second page is the second page has a square cut out of the middle of it.
Okay.
And then the third through the remaining pages are all just normal records. May I approach the witness with these?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what we've marked here as People 71. Do you recognize those types of records?
Yes.
Okay, the plastic sleeve, those first 2 pages, it's the front and back of the plastic sleeve. What are those?
Those are local usage detail records.
Okay, and the copy you have, the original, is much better than what's on the screen because it's hard to photocopy that kind of paper. But those are the local usage detail records.
Yes.
Okay, and then the remaining pages, those are the billing records.
Yes.
And on these particular records, does it appear from looking at them that the local usage detail records, strike that, the time period that these records were requested for, does it appear that they needed to pull more local usage detail records because the billing cycle hadn't completed yet?
Right, the previous bill had generated, that's what you see here,
Yeah.
and that's probably why you see the hole cut out.
So why, can you explain to the jury why, in your experience, there would be a hole cut out of these records?
Because they were outside the range of the subpoena, so whoever subpoenaed these records asked for a particular date, and these calls from November didn't fall within that subpoena, so somebody physically had to redact it.
Yeah, so back in the 1980s, there wasn't a computer to do this. Someone actually sat there in telephone security department and took scissors and cut
Right.
out records that were non-responsive, used a black pen sometimes.
Yeah, depended on the person, yes.
Okay.
And that's because these phone records that don't pertain to this would be private.
Yes, correct, they were outside the scope of the law enforcement request.
So it's to protect privacy of things that aren't related to this.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Okay. So, since we're going to be looking at the local usage detail records, the LUD, I guess, can you just explain some of the fields on this LUD? And the LUD. Can we put the original on the Elmo? I think it'll be easier for him to read.
Of course. It's actually a Wolf Vision document projector, and the Elmo people would be very happy with the free
Oh.
publicity you're giving them, and the Wolf Vision people would be so disappointed. But it's a Wolf Vision document projector.
Have to buy stock.
Yeah, like Xerox, right? I mean, it's become synonymous.
So I'm putting on the first page out of the sleeve. That's fine.
No, it's fine.
Okay. All right, can you see those?
Yes,
A little bit easier to read than the photocopy?
yes.
All right, can you then explain for the jury that first column, it says
Yeah.
OCC line?
Yeah, OCO is originating central office. That's the 877 is that identifies that building, that exchange, that the first part of the phone number.
Okay, so where it says 877-3413, is that the telephone number for this particular line,
Yes,
for these records?
yes.
All right, the next column says MODY, what is that?
It's the month and the day, so that first one would be January 21st.
All right. So I'm sorry, right here where it says MODY, that's month,
Month, day.
month, day. Okay, so this would be, the first call would be January 21st?
Yes, the first line, January 21st.
And again, is this the call, the date that this call is made?
The date that the call was made and something picked up on the far end of the number dialed.
Okay. The next column says WR/M.
It's hours and minutes, HR/N, hour, minute, so it's
And the
clock time. So
And there's either a P or A after that, is that for PM or AM?
yes, correct.
All right, so is that the time that that call was picked up by either a machine or a person?
Yes,
All right. Then you have TNPA, CL line. What is that? Those phone numbers listed there. What do those numbers represent?
that's the area code, the exchange, and the phone number. So it's the complete phone number identifying the phone that the call was made to.
Okay. And sometimes there's a number listed there and sometimes there's not, correct?
Yes.
When there's a number list, just explain for the jury, why is there sometimes a number listed there and sometimes there's not a number listed there?
So the first four lines where there's no number listed, that would have been a call local to the 877-3413 phone number. So they picked up the phone and dialed another number that was within its primary calling area. So no number would appear, but you would show that there was a call because it would be over either 3 or 5 minutes.
Okay, so that's what I just want to clarify. If there's no number listed, it means that that call you made, that person you called was within your local primary calling area, right?
Yes,
If it's shown on these records, it means the call was either 3 or 5 minutes, depending on which equipment was in place at the time, right?
yes.
Okay. All right. Then it says CAA. What does that mean?
Identifies the calling area. So A would be calls that were within the primary calling area. So you would see, wherever you see a call with no phone number, it would be within the A designation, which is primary. So it would have been within the 212 area code at the time.
Okay. And so that first call, January 21st at 11:57 p.m., you know, because it's an A and there's no number listed there, that the number that was called was within that person's primary calling area, and it was a 24-minute and 51-second call.
Yes,
All right. And if it was a 2-minute call, it wouldn't show up because it's under that 3 or 5 minute threshold.
correct.
All right. Then you have the ELAPM/S. Is that elapsed minutes, seconds of the
Yes.
call?
Yes.
And then it's ADMN, that column. What does that represent?
Additional minutes. So it's just extra minutes than the initial free calling time.
Okay. Then CLS.
It's just, again, billing, whether the call, how they bill the call, how they figure out how much they were going to charge for the call. NIT just stands for night. You see day in some of them, evening.
So can you tell by looking at the additional minutes and how these bills are being generated, whether the equipment in place at this time was 3 versus 5 minutes?
You can scan up a little so I can see the rest of the page. So I would say from this page on these records that this central office, the only way to know for sure is if you had the record from the central office, but this looks like a 5-minute central office.
Okay. So this number, these records here appear to be 5-minute switching equipment.
Yes,
So from these records, if a call is listed on here and there's a phone number there, it means it was a toll call, right?
correct.
And all toll calls would show up, right?
Yes,
If there's a number listed I'm sorry, if there's no number listed, but it shows up on these records, it means the call was within the primary calling area, but greater than 5 minutes,
Yes,
or 5 minutes or greater.
yes.
And if you continue to look through the records, to the billing records, did I take them back?
Yeah, you have to.
So who is the registered owner or user of this particular phone line?
Robert Durst?
And this is for telephone number 877-3413?
Correct.
If the, okay, we covered that, thank you. So as just by way of an example, on January 23rd at 12:29 a.m., a call was dialed from these records within the local primary calling area, because you don't see a phone number, right?
Yes,
And that call was, I don't know, approximately 71 minutes and 56 seconds, correct?
yes.
But we don't know who was called, right?
No,
Could have been anyone within that local primary calling area, right?
yes.
How many people in 1981 and 1982 were registered phone numbers in that local primary calling area?
Millions.
Okay, so any one of millions of people could have been called.
Yes.
And this exchange again is, where is the building and where's the phone exchange for 877?
That would be in Manhattan.
That's a Manhattan phone.
It's a Manhattan phone number, and the local calling area would have been anything in the 212 area code. So that would cover the 5 boroughs of New York City at that time.
Okay. And if you look at the LUDs, and if you look between January 30th of 1982, these records are for 1982 as well, correct?
Yes,
If you look at the LUDs between January 30th, 1982 at 9:01 a.m. and February 3rd at 3:10 p.m. Do you see those two records there?
yes.
Are there any telephone calls registered in this line on these records that were made between those 2 days?
Not that were billed, no.
Your Honor, just to clarify, as long as it wasn't, if it was less than 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm about to cover that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So, nobody, assuming this number's in Manhattan, assume it's at Riverside Drive, nobody picked up the phone between January 30th at 4:05 in the morning, I'm sorry, January 30th at 9:01 a.m. and February 3rd at 3:10 p.m. Nobody picked up that phone and made a toll call, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. It assumes it's contrary to the fact that if it was less than 5 minutes, it wouldn't show up.
Oh, okay, the question was toll call, so.
Let me be more specific with
The
you.
objection's overruled, he can answer and explain if it's
Okay.
not correct.
No toll call was made and connected between January 30th at 9:01 a.m. and February 3rd at 3:10 p.m.
That's correct.
So if somebody was at this number in Riverside Drive between January 30th at 9:01 a.m. and February 3rd at 3:10 p.m. and called a friend in Connecticut, that number would show up, right?
Yes,
That didn't show up, correct?
there's no call connected in.
If
showing
somebody was at
connected.
this apartment or this phone number between January 30th at 9:01 a.m. and February 3rd at 3:10 p.m. and called, I don't know, a relative in Long Island, that would show up, right?
Yes. And it connected.
And it connected.
Yes.
No such record exists, correct?
No.
That's correct?
That's correct.
No toll records, no toll calls connected between those dates and times, correct?
Correct.
If somebody picked up the phone and called someone local within the primary calling area, and the call was 5 minutes or longer, that would have shown up.
Yes.
There's no such call,
No.
correct?
Correct.
Okay. There could be a local call to any one of the millions of people registered with phone lines in New York City at that time that's under 5 minutes, and that wouldn't show up, correct?
That's correct.
Was Albert Einstein Medical School in the Bronx in the same primary calling area at that time as Riverside Drive in Manhattan?
The Bronx was in the local calling area at that time.
Okay. So if somebody was at this number in Riverside Drive and made a call to the Bronx and the call was 5 minutes or longer, it would show up on these records.
That's correct.
And no call between January 30th at 9:01 a.m. and February 3rd at 3:10 p.m. No such call connected, correct?
Correct.
Of course, these records obviously would have no way of showing if someone made a call from a payphone. Never mind. I can answer my own question. Never mind, I'm not going to ask it. In 1982, is there a way for someone who receives a call from being able to determine whether the call was made from a payphone, the person who answers the call? In other words, I'm sitting at my desk and I pick up the phone and I speak to someone on the phone. Is there any way for me to know as the listener whether the person who called me is calling from a payphone?
If you knew that when you drop, back then you had to put coins in the pay, if you were paying with cash, you had to drop coins into the payphone. The way the payphone and the telephone company determined how much you put in were like clicks, the best described as clicks. So if you put a quarter in, there would be a different sound if you put a dime or a nickel. So the person you're calling can hear that. You can hear the money being dropped into the phone.
Okay, so let's assume that the receiving party of a call picks up the phone, speaks to someone who called that person, and says that during the call they heard a signal interruption on the telephone call. Would that be an indication the call was being made to that person from a payphone?
Well, if describing a signal interruption, I'm assuming it's a sound. So you would hear a sound as money was going in.
Okay, and that would be an interruption in the signal?
Yes, could be described as that.
And again, with these records as well as the other records you looked at, would the missing pages be explained by redactions that were non-responsive to the subpoena?
Yes.
Okay. Last set of records I'd like to show you. I have a set of records, Your Honor.
Yeah.
May I mark these as People's 72?
Yeah.
Pages. Should have done that beforehand, sorry.
All right.
LADA 077463.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Thank you, sorry. Okay. May I approach?
Yes.
Okay. Are these also, again, these are pursuant to stipulation on us to authenticity and foundation. These records, again, are they from New York Telephone Company?
Yes,
Are they records from 1982?
yes.
And who is the registered owner of this telephone number?
Van Dorn Realty Corp.
Okay, and was it for telephone number? What's the telephone number?
It would be 212-586-3131.
Okay, and again, the missing pages, are those explained by redactions made by the telephone company?
Yes,
And the fields in these records, are they the same fields as the previous records with the same explanations on how to read them and interpret them?
yes.
All right, so I want to take you to page, what says page 24 of 35.
— 24 or 34?
24 of 35. Are you there?
On the screen, though, I think you have
No,
30.
yeah, you've got the paper in front of you. We're pulling it up on the screen.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay. I'm sorry, go to page 25 of 35. Okay, are you looking at the same thing that's on the screen here?
Yes,
All right. Do you see how in the number field, instead of the area code, it says COL?
yes.
What does that mean?
It's a collect call.
So can you explain, I think it's the same as it is today, but in case it was a little different, can you explain what a collect call means for those of us who've never made a collect call?
So you could pick up a phone, whether it be a pay phone or somebody's residential phone or an office phone. I'm sorry. You could call the operator and ask her to place a call, a collect call, to whatever number you're trying to reach. The operator would then call the number you're trying to bill it to. So in this case, they billed the number to the 212-586-3131. The person at that 586-3131 number would have to say, yes, I would allow the collect call, and then the operator would connect the call for the person trying to make the call.
Okay, and the person making the call, would they be calling the number listed in the number column next
Yes.
to COL?
Yes,
And the place, where it lists place, would that be the place that they were standing when they picked up the phone and made a collect call?
yes,
So, just to make sure everyone understands, if there's a COL, it means it was a collect call, is that right?
yes,
And a collect call means that someone was standing anywhere, basically in the world, and where they were standing is where it's listed in place, right?
correct.
And that person picked up the phone and dialed the number listed under the number column, is that right?
Yes.
And they said, I'd like to make a collect call. Well, they
Well,
actually
dialed
called the operator.
Yes, they dialed the operator first and
Yeah.
said, I'd like to make a collect call to a particular number, billed to the number that they want to, in this case, it would have been the 212-586-3131.
So as an example, on February 1st, if you look at the first number there,
Yes,
someone was standing in Katona, New York,
yes,
at 10:35 a.m.
Yes,
They called the operator and said, I'd like to make a collect call to the number 232-5523, and I'd like to charge it to Van Dorn Realty.
correct.
The operator called Van Dorn Realty, and whoever answered the phone agreed to pay for this call.
Yes,
Then the call was connected, and it lasted for 6 minutes.
yes,
And it was connected at 10:35 a.m.
yes.
All right. Anything I said inaccurate?
No,
All right. So then I want to take you to February 2nd at 12:19 a.m. I'm sorry. February 2nd at 12:19 a.m. Or 10:19 a.m. You have the originals in front of you?
yes.
What can you tell in the originals? Is that 10:19 or
It's
12?
10:19.
It's 10:19, okay. So on February 2nd at 10:19 a.m., somebody was standing in Beach Haven, New Jersey. They called Van Dorn Realty, they called the operator and asked Van Dorn Realty to pay for a call.
To Van Dorn Realty. So they called collect.
They called collect.
Right, so they picked up the phone, they didn't have coins, or it wasn't, they had no way of paying for the call, so they just picked up the phone, dialed the operator, said, connect me to, I want to make a collect call to 212-586-3131.
Can I have one moment? Are they calling 494-8913 or are they calling Van Dorn Realty?
No, they were at, in Beach Haven,
No.
at, it would be area code 201-494-8913.
Okay.
They picked up a phone, whether, I'm not sure if that would be a pay phone or it was somebody's phone. They just said, hey, can I make a call? I'll make a collect call. They called the operator and said, please connect me to 212-586-3131, collect. The operator would call, would connect to 212-586-3131, and the person who answers the phone would have to accept that collect call.
Okay, so I misunderstood or I misspoke earlier. I'm glad you clarified. All these collect calls are to Van Dorn Realty, and Van Dorn Realty's paying for the call.
Yes,
Okay, and they're calling from that number 494-8913 in Beach Haven, New Jersey.
yes,
All right. So the next call is made connected at 11:56 a.m. Again, the person standing in Beach Haven, New Jersey, calling Van Dorn Realty.
correct.
The next call is on February 2nd at 12:23 p.m. Again, the person is standing in Beach Haven, New Jersey, calling Van Dorn Realty, asking Van Dorn to pay for the call.
Yes,
The next call is at February 2nd at 4:55 p.m. Over 4 hours later, and now they're in Barnegat, New Jersey. Sorry. And they're calling Van Dorn Realty, asking Van Dorn to pay for the call.
yes,
Do you know, are you familiar with where, BCHVN, is that an abbreviation for Beach Haven?
yes,
And BARNGT, is that an abbreviation for Barnegat?
yes,
Are you familiar with where Beach Haven and Barnegat, New Jersey are?
yes.
Where are those?
They're on Long Beach Island, in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, the coast, Jersey
And-
Shore.
Can you describe the Pine Barrens, what that is?
Pine Barrens is a very large rural area that has a lot of pine trees, hence the Pine Barrens. It's just very sandy soil. It's a lot of state parks. It's just a big, not a lot of people live, or there's not a lot of businesses there.
Is this a vast remote area?
Yes,
And you say it has sandy soil?
yes,
Are there a lot of back roads and dirt roads into this area?
yes.
Is it a lit area? Is this an extremely dark area?
Extremely dark.
And have you, as part of your career, had investigations or been aware of investigations involving that area?
Yes.
How so?
Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point beyond the scope of his expertise and also irrelevant and speculative.
Perhaps additional foundation as to expertise. He did work in law enforcement.
Sure.
But I think the ultimate questions will lead to speculation, Your Honor, and also more prejudicial than probative.
Okay, thank you. We'll see what the questions are.
So, as part of your background in law enforcement, did you investigate homicides?
Yes.
For how many years were you investigating homicides?
Still 39 years?
Did you investigate homicides where bodies had been disposed of?
Yes.
And were you also involved in other investigations and speak to other investigators where bodies were disposed of in the New York area?
Yes.
And as part of your terrorism task force, were you involved in cases perhaps where bodies were disposed of, or no?
Not really.
Okay, so this would be more local New York crime.
Yes.
And did you ever, as part of your background training and experience that you had, ever have become aware of bodies that were disposed of in the Pine Barrens near Beach Haven, New Jersey?
I'll sustain the objection.
Okay. Were you familiar with the soil in Beach Haven, New Jersey as part of your background and experience?
Your Honor, I'm going to object.
Yes.
Okay, and is there something about the soil in Beach Haven, or I'm sorry, the Pine Barrens in that area? Strike that. Beach Haven and Barnegat, these are adjacent to the Pine Barrens?
Yes.
All right. Is there something about the soil, and in particular in relation to the winter, that sticks out to you from your background training experience in this area in the Pine Barrens?
Objection, Your Honor.
Vague?
Sorry?
Is it vague?
Yes, it is, Your Honor.
Doesn't mind. Stay.
All right.
Your Honor, could
In-
Mr. Chesnoff in the future give his own grounds before the court
I don't
helps him
really
out?
like
There's an echo here.
I can be more specific, Your Honor.
No, I mean, we got a preview. Mr. Chesnoff had told what he expected the questions would be, so I take that as sufficient.
I can be more specific.
You're training on sandy soil here.
Yes. Let's just get to the point. So those of us in Southern California, we're not used to this, but what is frost?
It's when during the winter, the ground freezes.
Okay, and at the end of January in the 80s, what was the ground like at that time in the New York area?
Your Honor, can I take him on blood here?
I'll just sustain your objection.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll sustain the objection.
Was there frost based on your training and experience as a homicide investigator who had experience with homicide cases involving the Pine Barrens area? Did the frost create difficulty in digging in the Pine Barrens area?
Objection, Your Honor.
Pine Barrens area.
I am going to contemplate the objection over our morning recess. It's 10:37. I'll give this 3 minutes, so we'll come back at 10:55. Ladies and gentlemen, do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case, and you do not discuss your testimony with any other witness.
That ringing noises back, it's quite distracting.
Yeah. Just a couple minutes. So our jurors have left the courtroom. A couple of points. First of all, Mr. Durst was here for the objection before.
Mr. Chesnoff's not hearing it. He went in there.
He doesn't need to hear this. The record will reflect that Mr. Durst was here during the litigation of the objection earlier, and of course he had the benefit of the court reporter. We don't need Mr. Chesnoff for that. Second, counsel, it's his hearing aid feeding back. We've got to do something about that because it's disturbing the courtroom.
You've entered an order, Judge, and they're not giving him new batteries.
You're not giving him what they're.
Okay, well, right now, he's got a visual on the testimony, so let's see what we can do about his batteries. He can read his, read the testimony, and all proceedings are reported to him in real time. Now, Mr. Chesnoff has returned. Here, I can let Mr. Chesnoff take this witness on voir dire, but I really think...
Can we explain the relevance very briefly, Ron?
It's totally relevant. I get the relevance. Can you qualify him as an expert in digging in sandy soil during the winter in New Jersey? I mean, he was presented as a expert on the phone records. He could do that too, I suppose. But go ahead.
We could, Your Honor. He's a homicide detective.
Yeah.
It's well known within the homicide community on the East Coast that even to the point that it's a part of the Sopranos, that the Pine Barrens is an infamous burial ground.
Well, that's not, lore is not grounds for
No, it's not.
Testimony. It's not.
No, but he's got personal. What I'm saying is he can testify.
First of all, wait. The point you're trying to make is that your expert testimony about people are buried in that place, and how does that tend to prove?
Well, let me explain. I think I can do it.
You already introduced testimony, which I would have stopped, but you put it in by stipulation that people are buried in the pine groves. That already came in. But as far as saying it's speculative. But I mean, what you do have is you've got evidence that Mr. Durst was there in that vicinity. So,
Your Honor,
what's the objection?
Yeah, the objection is that he has no qualifications. He's done no research on what the weather was like, what the ground temperature was, whether there was snow on the ground. I grew up there, Your Honor. That place can have 5 feet of snow in it. This is so speculative, based on no actual work, other than to quote a television show, which is now beyond me. I mean, what do the Sopranos know about anything? There's bodies buried everywhere in New York, in New Jersey.
Well, don't get carried away. But okay. Yes.
The relevance, first of all, the detective does not need to testify about what the conditions were that day. Number one, the court could take judicial notice that in the middle of winter on the East Coast, that traditionally the ground would be frozen, but it doesn't matter whether it's frozen or not. The relevance is that Mr. Durst, we can show circumstantially, took what we believe to be Kathy Durst, made those phone calls from an area that's next to a location that has accessibility to get rid of a body during the wintertime. So,
okay, I think you have Sargon problems here. I have to be the gatekeeper of expert testimony. Here, I don't think the foundation is adequate. He's going to a remote area. Put 2 and 2 together. You got your argument, even without the expert testimony. And needlessly enhances it. So I intend to sustain the objection. Okay, recess.
Hey, Dick, can we go talk, please?